All right, and we're back. So it's COMP3025. It's the winter 2016 semester, and it's week 3, lesson 3, part 1 of our broadcast. So the first part of this class, you've been doing a lab number 2, which is the group lab. You guys are using partner programming, and just as a note to partner programming, if I kind of pull up partner programming as a thing that we do, so if I say partner programming, right? It's actually, or pair programming is also what it's called. If you look it up on Wikipedia, it's something that's more and more commonly used, especially from an agile development perspective, right? So if you haven't seen it before, and if you think this is something that I'm doing just for class to make it easier for me to mark, yes, it's true, right? On one hand, that's my one underlying motive. But the other reason that I'm doing it is because truly in some more modern development environments, you have a chance to work with somebody else, and what ends up happening is it reduces error. That's what the thing is, and it makes your apps a little bit more. It's almost like you're pre-testing as you write and test at the same time. If you're in a Scrum situation, you're doing Agile with Scrum, and you're producing something for that particular Scrum or that particular day, you have to produce something, or that week, or whatever your cycle is, right? The great thing about that is you have an extra pair of eyes in pair or partner programming to help you to produce something of quality, right? Which is kind of cool. There's been opponents to this whole thing. I'll tell you, the big opponents are it's double the cost. So I have 2 guys looking at it, right? Like 2 pairs of eyes looking. I got to pay double the price. That's the opponent. On the proponent side, they say, yeah, you pay double the price, but it's either pay now or pay later, right? Double the price, but then you're getting a higher quality product and less testing and problems on the back end, right? You may, one partner or the other one may catch an error, right? Whereas if you're only doing it alone and then submitting it, and then you have the old process of going through and doing user testing, it takes a longer period of time and actually costs you more money, and it's outside of this whole agile environment because you're going back to the whole waterfall project management stuff again, right? So for agile, it works really, really great, and that's why I wanted you to experience it as well. And we do agile a lot now, especially for software development. Okay, so that's one. I also talked about the requirements, so let's talk a little bit more about that for today. So again, if it's due by the end of the day, group lab, 2% of your final mark. Again, you want to produce 2 things. I need a link to your GitHub. I also want a zip file, a zip archive of all your files, and all that kind of stuff that's due. And then please put your partner's names on your submission, so I know who's part of the team, right? And sometimes I've gotten it where I don't know who's part of it, and I can only give marks to one person. And then there's this whole remarking thing and everything else. It's a pain in the ass. Please do that. I also covered briefly assignment 1, and I want to cover that again on the video, so you can always refer back to it, just from a requirements perspective, because I know people are going to ask, so what did you really want on this one? And that's why I do the videos, right? So let's just go over that one more time, and then I'll get into a short lesson of views and the hierarchy. Okay, so let's talk about this. So if you look at assignment number 1 on Blackboard there, simple calculator app, like I said. So we went over this before, right? So you've got your buttons, and I don't need you to make this plus or minus sign or this % sign. Notice that the zero button is a little larger. If you were to take this view, and I'm just letting you know, and then create almost the same kind of view for your iPhone, and the buttons are really large, I'm okay with it. But I want you to style it for yourself. So maybe like what they did here, how they have all their operator buttons all the same color. That's not a bad scheme, right? I've seen some people decided to do different orientations. Like, for example, my calculator, Tom, only works in like landscape, right? That's totally cool. Choose an orientation, right? If you want to do your calculator in landscape, when you upload it to Blackboard, say, my calculator works in landscape. That's how my app works. Some apps work like that, right? So it's okay. I'm not expecting different orientation changes. I don't expect this to happen for your, like, you know, for landscape to portrait or working, and your operator buttons are going to pick. So how would you do this? So let's puzzle this out for a second. So I'm going to make a 1 plus 1, right? So I click 1 in the display. It's going to display 1, right? Typically, if you make any kind of label, it's going to display it on the left side, right? So if I was gonna lay this out with something like a fireworks, let's go to fireworks for a second. And I'm going to lay this out. I'm going to lay a new kind of app out on fireworks. So, and I use fireworks only because it's easier for me to lay stuff out. So if I go with fireworks, it's easier. If I go to new, and let's say my app, I want to make it the same proportion. So I'm going to make it an app for an iPhone. So I'm going to constrain it to about 320 by 480, right? I'll make my background white, all right? So this is my app, and I'm going to lay it out. Now, I'm not asking. In this particular assignment, I haven't asked you for wireframes or anything like that. I think it helps for you to do it anyway. Even though I haven't asked for it, I think it's a great idea to kind of lay out your app, like draw it out, all right? What you want, what's your final app going to look like? So here on your favorite graphics program, I'm using Fireworks. You can use Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever, or GIMP if you really so desire. I'm going to start laying out my buttons. So I'm going to start drawing some buttons out. So the first thing I want to kind of draw out is kind of on my display area, because this display area here, and that's not the color I want. My display area is you know, kind of, maybe I'll make it blue just to make it a little different. And we'll make it so that it's 2 pixels or 3 pixels, you know, kind of wide. There it is. There's my display area. So this is where my numbers are going to be, right? As an example on my app. And typically what happens is when you start getting your digits going, if I type in 1, right, as an example, I'm just putting this on, it's going to appear here by default, right? Because normally when we have a text box or something like that, it doesn't matter whether it's on Apple with iOS or whether it's, for example, with on Android, or even if you do things on the web, it's always the left side because we go left to right. Not so with a calculator, so be aware of that. Typically, calculators, we do right to left, right? So you're going to see this, 1, right, when you type 1. And then I'm going to start typing, right? So then I'm going to press the plus button. So let's make the plus button here for a second. So I've got my plus button somewhere. I'm just randomly putting it, you know, the button in. Yeah, okay, I'll make it black. And you know what? Let's put in a text, you know, to say plus. So I'm going to put my text item in there. We'll make it plus, and we'll change the color of that item, just for our example, to white. So we're going to go to white. So there's my plus sign. Yay, I've got a really ugly black button. And I can make this so that it's bigger, you know, so that it's a little bit larger. And you're gonna have to test that out. What looks right for you for your buttons? Okay, so this is my black button. I'm gonna group this together, right? So it's 1. There you go. My black button. So I've got my black button. Click the plus sign. And normally what happens is I'm just prototyping this with you now, right? So think about this. What's really gonna happen is you're gonna see this, right? Some kind of plus operator in a regular calculator, in a calculator that's online. You may not. You may see nothing. Sometimes you just see this. You press plus and there's nothing, there's no feedback to the user at all. I don't know what you pressed. So there's 2 approaches. No feedback, right, which is the traditional old style calculator. Press 1 plus and you don't get anything, right? The other way is, and it might help you to do this, is to actually put the plus, whatever the person types, inside of your layout, like your actual result label or whatever you want to call it, right? Okay, then I type 1 again, right? So I type 1 of my buttons and I get 1, and this whole thing would shift over, right? Notice how it would continue shifting from the right to the left. So 1 plus 1. Then I have an equals button. So I'm going to kind of make that equals button for a second. I'm kind of making buttons on demand here. Okay, so just, you know, bear with me. And we're just going to ungroup this one so I can actually go in there and change the button. So we can make it so it's an equal sign. There we go. So here's my equal operator. Okay, so I've got my equal operator. And then let's group this up a little bit again. There we go. And I'm going to group it. So I've got my equals. I press equals. And typically what you say, there's two options here. Once I press the equal button, it resolves whatever I kind of type in there. I'm trying to make it easy for you guys, that's why I'm showing you this, right? So it resolves, and then it kind of clears this out when you press equals, because the equals operator stops the operation. Whatever stuff I put in there, it takes that and resolves the operation. And now I've got a 2, and it appears on the right-hand side. So this is one option. Are there any other options? What other things? So you've got an operator and you've got 2 operands, right? The operands are the numbers, are the literals, right? On the left side, you've got your left operand. Usually you press the operator, plus, minus, division, whatever. And on the right side, you have another operand, right? So that's a simple calculation. What about if they keep going? So 1 plus, 1 plus, 1 plus, and they keep pressing plus. It's going to keep going, right? And it's going to accumulate that. The question I have to ask you is your calculator going to work like that? Are you going to show it up here? Or are you going to keep track of all the user presses on the back end? So there's a functionality piece that can be quite complex or easy, depending on how you handle it. For me, for what I want from you guys, I want you to choose how you're going to do it. Okay, I'm going to make you do it the easiest way you want. This is your app. Okay, if you want to show your calculations on the top, or your string of calculations or whatever you want, and you press the equal sign and it calculates everything, or even if you press the equal sign and it shows you the results there or whatever, that's up to you how you want to do it, right? But make it so that it's something that you would use. Would you use a calculator like that where you can go in there and modify it? And what about the backspace? Is there anything that can, I haven't talked about a backspace. In this scenario where I can put in, is there some way you can reset or backspace the stuff that you're typing in there, right? In other classes, here's another thing that people come up with. You can come up with the number keyboard. Here's something neat that someone came up with as a solution. I didn't make the buttons, Tom, but I with my press, when I press inside that text label, right, the number keyboard comes up, and I can use the number keyboard for my numbers. Is that okay? I'm okay with that. I'll tell you why. Because there's a special thing. You have to actually create a first responder, which we haven't talked about, right? A first responder in order for you to do that whole piece, where you actually press in the key in that text, and that's how we normally do it in an app. You press in the text box. I press in here, right, and also on a keyboard will pop up on the bottom. It just slides up, right? That whole keyboard popping up thing is built into iOS, but then you want it to stick around, right? And also maybe you want it to be there permanently. As soon as your app comes up, your keyboard comes up. That's a system keyboard, right? It's already made for you. There's a problem with that, in that you may get numbers or you may get stuff that you're missing. So some people have come up with a button bar, an operator bar that hides just above the keyboard, that when the keyboard slides up, the operator bar is on the top, plus, minus, division, and so on, right? But they're actual number keyboard, because there's different kinds of keyboards, right? Depending on the smartphone you have. If I choose a keyboard that I want to do any kind of email, the @ sign is included, right? That special keyboard. If I want to have a keyboard that only does numbers and calculations, the number keyboard is going to come up, so I can select my numbers, right? So you can do that, and I'm going to give you the option of going that way, all right? So before you ask me, the answer is yes, you can do it. If you want to bring up a keyboard that's system available to you, there's more work involved, okay, FYI, than that approach. If you make your own buttons come up, you actually put your own buttons, it's actually easier on the back end. After you've made your buttons, you've got your UI, it's set, you're good. The number keyboard approach is cool, and it's also responsive, so if I change my orientation, it'll reset the way it's supposed to work. But on the back end, it can be tricky in terms of how you get input from that, right? So just pointing it out there, right? So I've got my UI, and I've got to figure out how I'm going to lay that out. I didn't talk about that on your assignment. Your assignment just says a series of number buttons and a decimal button that allows me to produce either integer or a floating point number calculations, right? Here's the other question I always get for these one is, how much precision, Tom, do you want for your floating point numbers? And my answer is, it's really up to you, but I think you should probably fill up the display area, right? So if my display area holds 10 digits, and that's up to you how you set that up, then it's 10-digit precision or whatever it is, right? Which most floating points can do way over that, so you're good. So you don't have to show everything else, and you don't have to do the E. You don't have to do that shortcut to show how many digits of precision or 10 to the power of -3 or whatever. Don't worry about that. You know. How about negative numbers? What happens with that? So I get, I do another calculation, because these are options. I'm telling you about the scenarios here, right? Here's another scenario. I go -1, right? -1, right? And it equals. I get a negative number. What do you do?
I'd probably throw a 0 in the beginning there. Put 0 minus. And then...
Well, I'm saying there's different ways of doing this, right? So you have to think about these scenarios. So I'm going to put negative. I'm going to get a negative number. So it's possible you're going to get a negative number that you get to put up a negative sign up here somehow, right? So in my design, I've got to make room for at least my number plus potentially a negative sign, all right? That's going to be possible that you're going to come up with. So reserve a space for the sign. That's what I would definitely do if I was you, right? I would start off with thinking about this, right? The other thing is, how many digits of precision? I'm also going to need the decimal point. So that's another space that I need, that I have to reserve for the decimal point, right? Because if I don't reserve space for the decimal point, it's going to be overwritten. Like I'm going to go over. You're going to see half a number at the end of my display at the end of the day, right? So be careful about that, because that's really a pain in the ass. And from a user experience perspective, it's really sucky, right? If you see like half a number like kind of at the edge of your display like this, right? Like you might see something like that depending on how you lay things out. So be careful with that, right? So you have to kind of think this through. And my recommendation to you is that you plan ahead of time. Plan your layout like I'm doing here, draw it out. And I haven't really drawn any numbers, but I could really quickly put some numbers together. And then I have to realize I only need 0 to 9. I don't have what I show here on my thing. I don't have the AC button. I have a reset button that I've asked you to put on, right? That resets the whole calculator and gives me that 0 on the right side, right? Some people ask, well, Tom, can I put in a power on button? Some people want to put a power on button to show, like, you know, I have to power the calculator, almost like a little game. Power the calculator on, and then click the power button, and it goes off. And it kind of disables all the things. Again, any kind of little trick like that, I would give you bonus marks for. If it looks cool and there's some really cool user functionality, I'll give you bonus marks for it. Any questions around this thing? I know this is something that we talked about, but so there's 3 different sections that I've kind of covered here. The number buttons, the operator buttons, the display area that you're getting your results, and the reset button, all right? Other than that, the same typical stuff that I always ask for internal documentation. Make sure you comment your Swift code, because another part of this is Swift programming. So you're going to learn a little bit of Swift programming here. Not a lot. It's not like that complicated. And, of course, GitHub. Okay. Any questions or concerns around the assignment? Remember, due next week. It shouldn't be that difficult for you to do if you work on it. Next week, Friday at midnight. Okay? That's when it's due. All right? So, again, you should have, if you haven't already started, start. Right? So you should have gotten this going. I need some feedback now from this lab. So you guys did the lab. How did you guys feel about constraints and everything we've done here with on the iOS devices? How are you feeling? I want to get some feedback for you guys. And I know what you're going to say, but most likely. But so Sam, what you and your group, who, you know, you're working together. What did you feel about the whole constraint system? I want to hear from every group, just really briefly, 2 minutes, you know, kind of thing.
No problem. It's good stuff. Just the VM makes it very slow.
The VM makes it very slow. So this is technology. So it's good stuff. You like it, but the VM. How about your group here?
The
Kelly.
instructions were kind of vague.
The instructions were vague, right? Here's a question for you. Whenever you go more, if you actually get a client to give you instructions, do you think the instructions are going to be less vague than that?
No, like when you're in a press time environment.
It doesn't matter even if you're not in a press time environment. That's what I'm saying. The instructions we get from our clients suck, right? And it's our duty to try and get to them and say, can you clarify this requirement, right? So it's okay. I know this is not the latest version of the thing. It's going to work for the most part. Most of you got it done, right? Which with a little bit of a workaround, no, you didn't get it done. No, there's some problems with yours. It's okay. Huh? Works for iPad, but not for iPhone.
Yeah,
so.
works for iPad.
iPhone, but not iPad. These guys have the other results. You guys work for iPhone, but not iPad. Maybe you guys can share results before the end of class. I don't know, right? Huh? What about yours? What about your feedback?
Seemed very specific when you're like adding and removing constraints and uninstalling and installing them. Like, how would you know to do that if I didn't have specific instructions?
Remember we talked about this, right? In the beginning, when we learned the system, it's we try and mimic what we see, and then we get ideas of what we can do, and what I would do. I'll tell you right now that some of those specific constraints, they've obviously tried and tested that kind of stuff to make sure it works, right? In your case, I mean, as you get more experience with making constraints, you realize the steps you're going to take. Part of it is doing, unfortunately, for this one. There's no methodology that I would tell you, right? It's a lot of it about how things are relative. And the PowerPoint that I've actually put up on Blackboard should help you. If you actually read that PowerPoint and go through it, which is part of chapter 3 from the book, right? Then it's going to help you out, make your job a lot easier than what they've done here on this little handout, right? Yeah, and I'll come back to you.
Why not just add them one variable?
I love your answer. And the thing is, you know what? Apple's continuously working. That's the feedback they always get every single year. That's the same feedback. Constraints suck. Yeah.
I would just say that like it has helped a little bit with my understanding of how constraints work, but
yeah,
it still feels super like robotic. Like you're just doing what they say.
And you know what? I 100% agree with you. You are robotic right now, all of you guys, because this is the beginning of the journey. Right? Truly, you know, these little things we've talked about is like scratching the surface. Like it takes a long time for an Apple developer to be really good and confident. It takes years, no joke, right? Like it takes the people that I know that's what they do. in the beginning. First of all, think about all the changes that they go through every single year. The reason why they go to that stupid Apple Development Conference every single year, and for people who are watching this probably from Apple one day, they'll say, "You said stupid. Oh my God, I'm an Apple evangelist. What are you saying?" Right? The reason why they go to these conferences is because technology and their platform is changing continuously. Like every single year, they come up with iOS, next version of iOS, pretty much over every other year, or every single year, every other year, right? So iOS 9, you know, is where we're at right now, and I fully expect by the end of this year we're going to probably be at iOS 10, right, by September, right? So that's huge. Like, you know, you're coming up with a brand new version of iOS that's not backwards compatible because they've added and removed features, and also for that they update Xcode. So Xcode's changed. Look, the one you just this little thing worked perfectly with Xcode 6 and iOS 8, and now we're at Xcode 7 and iOS 9, and things are broken, right? So you got to think of in the mind of a developer what they're going through, right? I'm not sure if that answers your question, but the idea here is to get you guys a kind of an understanding by doing some hands-on work, right? That's why I did this lab with you guys. But there's easier ways to approach it. And when you start programming the next step of your learning for your UI development, because this is what we're focusing on in the beginning, right? Less functionality, more UI, because no UI, no functionality either, right? Is trying to get those buttons out there. Here's another question. If I make a button for my assignment, before I get some more feedback from everyone else, my button in my assignment is just going to look like a link by default. Have you ever looked at those buttons? You drag and drop a button onto your screen. It's like a link. It doesn't look like a button at all, right? How do I get the button to look like a button? That's the other question. And I'm going to have to use images. That's one of the ways of doing that. You may have to do a little bit of research on your own about this, because even the presentation doesn't tell you how to make the button look like a button. It looks like an image, right? So take a look at that. You may have to decide for yourself, if I want to color this button and make it look like an image, not just like a flat surface, right, with a number in the middle. And when I hover over that, when I put my finger on the button, it looks like I'm pressing on it, right? So there's some extra work that has to be done to give your button a button-like look feel, right? All right, how about some other feedback? So you guys had, how about your team?
I'd just say that it's very easy to miss some of the constraints. Like if you miss one, the rest of them are pretty much all.
Okay, so the answer is you miss one constraint and all the constraints are messed up, right? And even if you go and do that, add suggested constraints and do that whole menu, it completely messes you up for other views. Because one of the things I've also included in this little lab is the whole idea of view classes, right? Different view different view classes for different kinds of devices. This book, the one that we're using, doesn't really talk about that too much, right? It doesn't say, hey, let's talk about different view classes. How would it be on an iPad or whatever? This book is strictly for iPhone, the whole book. So think about that again. And that's why I'm not really making it happen. I'm not going to ask you to do iPad and iPhone compatible apps for this course because we don't have any time. Truly, it's going to be one more level of things you guys are going to have to do. So that's why I'm not asking for it. Not because I don't want you to practice or understand it. I think you should know that it's out there, but it takes an extra level of effort to design your UIs for that. And a lot of people do a lot of wireframing around that. So here's what I want my UI to look like. Okay, cool. Now that I have my wireframe, I'm going to start adding constraints so that wireframe works and doesn't break my other view, right? Okay, so we're going to get more into this, but that's part of what we do. When we build a UI, we always have to be mindful, is it going to break my other view as well? Let's not kill my iPhone view or my landscape view when my portrait view is working. Because you can do that if you're not careful. All right, so any other feedback? I know we kind of talked about this, but I want to get your idea, your sense of it. It's not easy. Again, I'm going to go back to that again. It's not easy. And we talked about this already. If I did an Android app, I'd be done. And I wouldn't have to worry. If I did an iOS, some kind of like a web-based app, and again, I'm going to say it again. If I was going to recommend it to you, prototype with something web-based. That's what I would recommend, right? Take that away again, right? Because once you prototype with something web-based, it's easy for me to see, do I have interest? I've prototyped it. This is how I want it to work. Now, after it's working, I want to deploy to Android and iOS specifically. But in the beginning, you can use something like a Cordova, PhoneGap, Accelerator Titanium, something like that, Xamarin, whatever you decide to use to create your prototypes. Okay, up online, what I've put up is a couple of this one presentation for today called, it's all around views and the view hierarchy, right? And the great thing about this one, if you notice what I talk about, is views and frames, which is cool because you know, when you do your frame layout, you click on your frame layout as an example and it says, update your frames, right? It asks you what, and we don't know what frames are. So if we step through this thing, it actually starts building off this World Trotter app, right? Which is something that every other presentation from now on we're going to build, right? So the World Trotter app, so it actually builds out kind of similar to what we did today with a weather app, but only in portrait, no landscape, and only for the iPhone. So as you go through, if you notice what they're kicking off when they start off their project, and if you notice it says different sections like created the new project, where it says create a new project, which is like kind of section 3 here, if you're using frames, here it is. All they're saying is only make it for iPhone, right? And the devices drop down, right? So only for iPhone. They recommend that you don't choose anything else, right? Here's another thing. The reason why it may not have worked for you. Did you choose, when you created your app for your lab, did you choose universal?
Yeah.
Right? Yes? Right? Depending on what you chose here, whether you chose universal or iPhone, it'll affect the output of your app as well, right? So just keep that in mind. That's why when we start working, for you to build your app for your assignment number 1, please choose iPhone. It's going to make you have consistent results for iPhone, okay? If you choose something like universal, it's going to mess you up because it's going to present other options for you, and your constraints will work a little bit different. Your view classes will work a little bit different as well. Okay, so that's one. So we talked about frames. In the presentation, there's 2 ways to create almost like the view itself, right? One way is to drag and drop like we've been doing so far. In the presentation, which is really cool, they talk about how to do this procedurally or programmatically, right? So if I'm going to programmatically create views, they show you how to do that here. They give you a little bit of code to explain how the views are created. One thing to note is that when you create your rect, your CG rect, like we do in a lot of other programs, and if you guys have done, I think this cohort, you guys have done advanced graphics with me when we did the game, right? We did Create.js and all that stuff in TypeScript, yeah? Right? So you guys know that, you know, that the top left corner of our screen, right, is where we start counting the, you know, our how we kind of measure our X and Y. We start at the top left corner. It's the same thing here. So when we use our CG rect, right, as an example, when we create a frame, we can create a custom frame like that. And when we do that, it starts off the top left corner. One thing that this really does well, this presentation, which I'm not going to read it all for you today, just from a time frame perspective is, and this I want to go down to this little view here. It really talks nicely about, it has a really nice picture about your constraint system. In just a moment, I want to make sure I get that one page. This kind of gives you the hierarchy of how it works. Your UI window, and then all of your other nodes inside of your views and subviews, and how they kind of partition. This is kind of a neat little picture as well. That's right out of the book, right? But there's another one. There's another one that's really cool. Just want to skip forward for a second to see it. In just a moment. And again, why? The other question is, why would we use UIKit? UIKit is where we're going to get all of our iOS-specific classes to build the UI. We talked about that last week when we did a little bit of Swift. So here's an example when they did the a programmatic version of creating a CG rect, so an actual rectangle that appears inside of our view, right? So we create our first frame. We call it CG rect. And notice how it has X and Y coordinates with a width and a height. So X and Y coordinates are in the top left corner of our screen, right? But what kind of, if I'm using X and Y coordinates, what kind of view am I getting? Am I really using the auto layout? Guys, what do you think? Am I using auto layout if I'm using X and Y coordinates? No. It becomes an absolute layout, right? Absolute layout is okay to use in the beginning when you're learning, okay? But the problem with that is that it's absolutely not compatible, right, with all devices. I mean, and it goes against Apple's kind of philosophy of using auto layout to create, or adaptive layout like we did today. What we did today is more of what Apple thinks about. It thinks about how to create layouts for any device. Here they talk about a CG rect that has X and Y coordinates relative to the top left corner of the screen. But that means that I'm making it for a specific screen, whatever it's going to be, right? Because some of my screens may or may not show the same way. It may not be centered in the right way. And they talk about that here in the presentation. But this is how you would do it. You create your frame, you initialize your view, and then you basically put your frame, this rectangle, inside the view as a parameter. So I've got my programmatic view, almost like that view controller view that you guys were doing here in the lab, right? Okay, cool. I can set the background color, and it's just, I'm using the UI color class to set the background color. And then I'm going to do this, which is kind of cool. If you've done Create.js or any kind of a Flash programming, we can add this view as a subview or as a child of our container, right? Which we've done before. So if you've done any kind of a UI program before, programmatically it looks very similar. It's not going to be something that you can't read and go, okay, I know what we're doing here, right? So when I go add subview, again, when we talked about views, think about the Apple word for control is view in our context, right? So add a view is really adding a control to my interface. Okay, that's what we're doing here. And you may have to do some of this with your calculator, but chances are you can get away with drag and drop for what our little thing does. And so this is an example in the first part of the presentation. They talk about views and frames and how you can absolutely design your layout based on X and Y coordinates, okay, which is not what we want to do. And I want to keep going through here because they give some pretty good examples of how to do it programmatically. It's there. I want you to know about it, but we're going to do more of the stuff where we have our views done with auto layout. And so this is their first piece. They've actually, this is your little, what they talk about here in the first, I don't know, 30 pages of the presentation as an example, and there's 70 pages I think to this thing, or something thereof. This is your practice. This is you understanding what the landscape is like. So if you actually go through this presentation, it's really useful to do it. I mean, I could have gotten you to do this one as well to understand how to create this. The problem with this one is you're making an absolute layout. Second piece to this one. All right, so you're going to go on to this next piece. Once you start customizing your labels in this particular case, it talks about how to get the color. And some of you had that problem. In your lab here, you know Kelly and friends. They were like Kelly and friends. Kelly and Peter, right? Is it Kelly and Peter or Kelly? No, who's sorry?
Me.
Kelly and Richard. Kelly and Richard were working on when you guys were working. Couldn't find your color control. Did anyone else have that problem? Because it says find the color control or whatever. You couldn't find it, and where they told you to get it, it didn't exist because they've reorganized Xcode, right? Well, here what they do is they talk about the same thing. They talk about how to decide different kind of sliders. Notice how there's different sliders. There's the pencil slider for colors. You can choose the from the color wheel, or you can choose the sliders that we got to create your colors. So you may have seen that in your particular version of your code. So the build for this particular app is very, very simple. But then they get into something that is the piece. So from about slide 37 on, and this is where I would ask you to read from if you're going to do homework for next day, right? Read from about slide 37 on, and this is going to clarify some of the stuff you've done today in your lab, and it may help you when you're doing your assignment number 1. So please focus on this stuff. It's right out of the book. If you don't have the book, I presented it here. All I've done is I've decanted it here in the PowerPoint presentation. So it's not my work, it's the book's work, and I've just put it in a layout that you can find. So from about 37 on. And this is what I wanted to show you. This is where the language that we talked about leading and trailing, with left and right, they talked about what the meaning of leading and trailing is. And which group pointed it out to me? Someone pointed it out to me. We're talking around it. You guys, it's leading and I think you guys did it, right, in the corner? Leading and trailing, who did it? Who's talking about leading and trailing? And you're trying to figure out what it meant. Left and right means leading and trailing. So leading, notice where it points to. It points to the left side of the screen. And trailing, whenever you see trailing, it points to the right side of the screen. So whenever you hear that word, trailing to, or leading to, it means that it's from the left side or the right side. Apple's words for left and right, basically, is what it is. No, it's just, we have to talk about this because when you start building, you're like, what does leading and trailing mean? Well, it means left and right.
Why is it like that? That's why I'm saying that.
It comes back from the print days. We use leading and trailing, right? If you do any kind of print production, then you know leading and trailing what it means, right? But if you don't know that, so now they explain it, and they're moving towards that best practice. That's why Apple's doing it. It's actually a really good system, right? But it takes a long time to learn. Right, and it's going to take us a couple of assignments. Your assignment number 1, you're building this basic as calculator. Your assignment number 2, you're going to get to more robust calculator and more other things, other views, other screens that you can create, and how to move from one screen to the other. You're going to get to that, right? So this is a nice slide in terms of how it presents height and width and what the language means, right? Which is really, really important. And they go into detail, they kind of break it out here in terms of alignment, right, to make you understand what it all means. Baseline, they kind of define everything here on the slide. The other thing is they also talk about is, and you'll see this a lot, is the idea of the difference between a frame or contains the whole view, right? Where an alignment rectangle, all it cares about is the content that's inside, right? So when you do your restraint system or constraint system, I mean, what you do is, depending on what you choose, whether it's alignment or frame, the language, this is what the language means, which is really key. If you don't know this, and then you're like, so what do I choose? Do I choose frames or alignment? What do I choose? Well, this is where you're choosing. If I choose frames, it means the whole, everything around it. The bounding box is another way to think about it, right? And if you're choosing alignment rectangle, it's just the content. You don't care about the stuff that's outside of the content. It doesn't frame everything, which is kind of weird for me, right? Because like I would always, my way of thinking, I always think about bounding boxes and frames, right? Like that. That's how I always think about stuff, right? And probably for the most of you as well, right? But again, the Apple way to think about it is also with the alignment rectangle, all right? So just think about that. There's stuff that's going to stick out of it that's going to be outside of frame. It's part of the content that you're worried about, the main content you're caring about, and the other stuff that's outside of frame you don't care so much about, right? Okay, so you're going to see that again, all from page 37 on. And now they go into details about constraints here, right? And the key things to note is every constraint is in points. It's not in pixels, because if it was in pixels, again, we're going to go back to absolute layout, right? So points. Think about a point is, depending on the retina screen you're using, what's the ratio of different screens? Even on Android, you might have a different perspective or you know, pixels per inch as an example on an Android device, right? So give me an example. Does anyone know what their Android device has? Like, it's not like Retina, but most of you have Android devices. What's your pixels per inch as an example? Do you know? So, well, or how much? What's your resolution? Is your phone high resolution? Is that? Yeah, it's pretty huge, right? So if I did pixels, not points, right? You'd have a very small view. Like your view would actually come out like really super small. Yeah.
So is points comparable to like EM?
What it does, it's a relative value, right? So it basically says relative to the storyboard, there's so many points on the screen to the storyboard. And so what happens is, like the M, right, or REM, it scales up depending on what size you're using. So notice that if you did your iPhone app, it'll scale to fit your iPad as well, right? Sometimes in the wrong way, by the way. It'll just, you know, stretch it really weird, right? Yes.
How many EMs are around?
Why are you asking these questions? It's not relative. Depends on the size of your font, right? Your base font size.
So isn't EM based on the size of letter E, right?
The M is based on the size of an M, right? If I go back to, if we're talking web, right? And it's the base font size is 16 pixels, right? So that's your base font size for an M, right? 16 pixels. If you change your base font size to 18 pixels, now your M is 18 pixels, depending on your base font size that you specify in the body tag. Yeah. So if I say my base size is 18 pixels, right? As an example, font size 18 pixels, then your M is 18 pixels for that entire body page, unless you otherwise specify, locally.
So if I say 2M, would that be twice the size?
Twice the size. So if my base size was 16 pixels, it'd be 32 pixels. That's what an M is, right?
What's EM or REM?
REM is like M's, but it's a responsive M. Okay, so it deals with things a little bit differently. Okay, but we're getting off topic. So I know you guys are really close, eh? So one of the things to notice about, and I've just kind of I want to hit this before we go, is the idea of the nearest neighbor. And the nearest neighbor, really, when we talk about nearest neighbor, we're going to talk about this as we go forward. Nearest neighbor is relative to the direction that you're talking about. So if I'm talking the vertical nearest neighbor, it's this one, right? Because of where this particular item sits, right? If I was over here, the nearest neighbor would be this one, if it was in the vertical space. If I was over here, the nearest neighbor would be this one. Even though this one's over here and closer to the bottom, that's not the nearest neighbor. Nearest neighbor is considered the one that's right above the other one in the vertical layout. If you're talking horizontal, notice how your horizontal layout, you might think about this as the nearest neighbor, but it's not, because horizontally you're crossing over, this horizontal layout is crossing with this bounding box over here. So this would be the nearest neighbor. Yes.
If it doesn't cross the,
It's going to pick the nearest one that doesn't cross, right? So it would be this one. So if I was right in the middle, I'd be picking this one, right? So I want to talk about this because in the constraints, it's going to ask you nearest neighbor. Which one do you want to align with? Because the constraints will align to however you want. It's a relative system. So one item will be relative to another item, right? So let's say, for example, I have a label and I want to make it bound to the nearest neighbor. Now you know what the nearest neighbor means, just in case you get that when it comes to your buttons, right? Because that, for some people, it's like, especially for me, when I was learning it, I was like, what? This is the nearest neighbor, but no, it wasn't. It was the other one that was above it because it wasn't directly aligned. Okay, it's just FYI. That's how it works. And then you draw a line. So you also look at the lines. Wherever your constraint draws, it draws a line from the actual view that you're hitting to the nearest neighbor. Actually draw a line there. So you'll see what the nearest neighbor is. And you'll be like, hold on, that's not my nearest neighbor. That's not the one I want. I want this one. But that's not it. Unless it's directly aligned, it's not the nearest neighbor. Okay. Just going to go through the ones that we talked about. So, and the other people we talked about this last week and today is when you hit this auto layout constraint menu, it's great for something like this because all this is, if you notice, this is stacked order. So you've got your one label here, another label, another label, another label, and this is all stacked. So when you do your auto layout constraints, how far off can you be, right? You're not going to be that far off, you might think. But when it comes to what we did today, because you had an image and because you had a text box on the bottom, a text container, and then you put stuff inside the text container and all that kind of stuff, using auto layout can actually mess you up pretty nice. So be really careful about what you're highlighting when you're using auto layout. Because in the auto layout, you have two little menu pieces like I showed you guys. The top part of the menu is for specific things that you're touching. So if you've selected whatever view you've selected, and the bottom piece is for all views. If you hit that all views, that means sometimes it'll even hit all the views for different perspectives, for different size classes too. Right, so that means you'll hit things for the iPad. You'll hit, like, depending on what you hit, and it'll mess you up. So use GitHub. Use GitHub often. Make sure you save your work before you go, and try not to before you're satisfied. Don't close down your machine. All right, don't close down your Xcode because then you can't undo. Right, and we found that as a perfect way of doing things. And I'm telling you these things because I've run into the same thing. I've tried to build a layout with Xcode and stuff, and it messes me up too because I'm like, oh man, I can't undo anymore, right? I can't go back. I have to go do the whole constraint system myself by hand. All right, so here's another thing. If there is an orange constraint, it's going to give you a warning, right? And the warnings, they don't stop you from compiling and running your code or building your application. The warnings, the orange stuff, right? Only the reds. The reds will break your code. You won't be able to run it anymore, right? But what this tells you is I've got a horizontal position which is ambiguous, which means I don't have enough. Usually, I don't have enough constraints to tell my system that how this label or control or whatever it is going to be positioned relative to other different kinds of devices, right? So if I deploy on as an example, on an iPhone 6, I'm going to have. I need some certain constraints. If I go to an iPhone 4, it might look a little different. So what this is telling me is I need additional constraints. And usually you need at least two, all right? At least two constraints for each view somehow, one or the other, right? Whether your constraint, you're actually being relative to the actual container object, the view controller view, or you're being constrained to the nearest neighbor, like we talked about before. You need typically two constraints at least. Okay. We've talked about some of this already, how to add stuff, and the difference between absolute layout. Okay, I don't think I want to cover too much more. Okay, and here's, again, the warning icon. Notice how they're creating another frame for this particular application. And we're going to get into it more. What I want you to do for homework, all right? Again, you have your app that you're going to build for me for Friday. It's due Friday. Typically, I'd make it due on Thursday. I wanted to give you an extra day only because I know how things go, right? With this stuff, you're going to start building your calculator, and you're going to start having some of the similar stuff that you had in here today. Please don't email me on Friday night after we have class and say, Tom, I'm in trouble. I just started my app, right? My calculator, right? And I'm in trouble, right? I won't be able to finish. I need an extension, right? I don't have a Mac and I got locked out of school, right? You know, whatever. I didn't have a chance. I can't work at home. I've been working at the school and I'm tired and I want to go home. Can you please extend me until Monday, right? Guys, come on, right? Please hit me up like on Wednesday, Thursday, so I can answer some of those questions, right? If you're gonna have an issue, so I can give you a little bit of time. Worst case scenario, even Thursday's late, right? So please, the presentation I've got out there again I've decanted the book. I'm hoping it's going to help you, especially from about the slide 37 on, to help you create your app if you read it. Okay? Questions before we go for the day. All right, please hand in. Who has not handed in their labs? Lab 2, please hand that in before end of the day. You have a few minutes left. I don't think there's another class after this, so I'll wait till noon for you guys to hand it in, but it's due by noon. Okay, so please get that done by end of the day. Okay, otherwise, thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you next week. And I want to get feedback. I want to see how your process is when you're looking at your calculator. I want to hear the stories, you know, of how your calculator is working.
It's gonna be each of the rates.